Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 10 o'clock. All right, does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about up till now? Any questions at all on what we've looked at? No? Who went out and started their investment portfolio? Anybody? You need to get on that. You did? No? You need to get on that. I'm serious. You should not wait. Yes?
Wait, I have a question.
Sure.
What's the chances of like a mutual fund failing?
There is a risk, and that's why you're getting an interest. That's why you're getting interest, right? That basically associates to the risk. So when you go and you look at a mutual fund, there's chairs right back there. When you look at a mutual fund, there's like when you go to like your bank, there'll be like thousands of them, and there'll be from low risk, which is basically they won't ever be worth nothing, to high risk, which they could very possibly become worth nothing. And you have to weigh what you want to risk. But here's the thing: if a medium risk mutual fund were to go to zero, well, then your money's not worth anything in this country anyway. Because that means that basically every major corporation in America went to zero. You see what I'm saying? So if the major medical corporations that run like hospitals, the major technology corporations, the major food service corporations, if they all go to zero, then you can picture what this country then looks like at that point. That's the difference between a mutual fund and investing directly into a stock. So if you play the stock market, which you can do, but you shouldn't do that as a retirement system. That's where you would say, well, I'm going to buy Apple stock or Amazon stock and hope it goes up. And if it goes up, well, then you win big, right? If you would have bought Amazon stock at $15, $15.31, I think it was when it went public, well, then you'd be a millionaire right now. And there are people in the country that are millionaires just because they bought Amazon at that price. But for every Amazon, there's thousands of bankrupt companies. And so that's a huge risk there because an individual company can fail very easily. In fact, Amazon can still fail, right? Sears was the biggest company in America for a certain amount of time, and now they're just non-existent. They're bankrupt. And anyone that had their stock is at zero. The difference between a mutual fund, I don't know if you know how these work, so I'm going to explain them very briefly. So a mutual fund is where a fund manager takes money and buys shares in, let's say, 500 companies. Usually it's even more than that. But let's say 500 companies. He buys shares in companies, and not in one sector. He'll buy technology shares, medical shares, he'll buy services shares, restaurants, all different types of big companies, small companies of all different type, right? Oh, it got locked? What? So he'll buy them, and then what you're doing when you invest in the mutual fund is you're buying stock in his company that is in all these other. Can you see how that works? So you can't afford, most of us can't afford to say, well, I'm going to put $100,000 into Apple, and I'm going to put $70,000 into this hospital management fund and our company, and we don't have that kind of money, right? But I can say I'm going to put $1,000 into the mutual funds account, and then I'm getting a sliver of every stock therein. So, and the reason why that's safer is because if technology stocks go down, like for instance coronavirus in China doesn't allow the supply chain to work properly, and so the Apple and Samsung and these stocks that are dependent on the supply chain of China, their stock goes down, but hospital stock goes up, right? Because hospitals are worth more when you have an epidemic, right? So their stock can go up. And so then because you're invested across the board in that, well, then you actually don't see a big hit. So like the stock market fell, how far has it fallen now? Like 2,000 points or something like that in the last month or so. But my mutual funds basically have not changed because the Dow Jones is a very specific sector that they're measuring. It's not all stocks across all things. And so a mutual fund will invest across much broader range, so the short answer is that it's pretty secure. Now, there is nothing that's secure. So what would be the option to a mutual fund? Let's say you think, well, that's risky. So then what can you do with your money if you don't do that? Any idea?
Put it in a savings account.
Okay, put it in a savings account. Very good. Now, first off, banks do go bankrupt, and you lose your money in the savings account. Now, the FDIC has guaranteed up to $100,000. So as long as you're under $100,000, then the government will cover that. If the bank goes bankrupt, the federal government will pay you back your money. It may be $250 now. It used to be $100,000. But yeah, so if you're below that amount, then you have that there. But that's not the real risk in savings account. The risk in savings account is that you are not keeping up with inflation. Who knows what inflation is? Anyone know what inflation is? Yeah.
It's just like as time goes on, like money's worth more, or money is worth less as time progresses.
In relative to its purchasing power.
Yes.
Correct, exactly right. So what were you going to say? Yeah, money becomes worth less in purchasing power. So if you think about, like right now we think gas is high, but actually gas is very low, right? So like 20 years ago, I remember filling up my tank here in San Antonio at like 90 cents a gallon. It was what? But that's actually more money than at $2 a gallon today. Because 90 cents bought more 20 years ago than $2 buys today. You understand what I'm saying? So if you were to look at how much you can buy with $2, like how much your rent costs, how much all these things, and you look at that and say, okay, what's that purchasing power of $2? And compare to the purchasing power 20, actually it was more than that. It was 20, it was Cole was a baby, so it was 26 years ago when I did that. So if you look at, let's say 30 years ago to make it rounded off, 90 cents would buy a lot more than $2 buys today. So let's say you had taken that 90 cents and put it in a savings account. Well, the interest rate is like 0.1% or something. It's ridiculously low. You're not getting any money. And the inflation rate is like 3 or 4% maybe. So your money is losing value. So you put $100 in the savings account, and 100 years later, you don't have $100 anymore. With all the interest, you probably will have maybe $20 if you're lucky in purchasing power. It doesn't matter what the number is. It only matters what it can buy, right? So if you take the money that you could buy a house with today and put it in a savings account, in 50 years, you could not buy a house with that money. That means you lost all that value. And that's an almost certain loss. It's hardly ever in human history that money has become worth more. That just hardly ever happens. And there's a lot of complex reasons for that. Very complex reasons. And one of them is that the government simply prints more money, devaluing your money. You see what I'm saying? So money has value because of its relativeness, its relativity to products. So let's imagine the U.S., all the products that exist in the U.S., things you can buy with your money, whether they're objects or services, okay? So imagine everything in the U.S., and let's say that everything in the U.S. is worth $1,000. Every single thing you could possibly purchase in this country, let's say it's $1,000 of value, just to give us an easy number to think about, okay? Well, and then so the government has $1,000 in printed bills, okay? There's 1,000 $1 bills. That means that every $1 bill corresponds to 1/1000th of what is available to purchase. There's a correspondence there. But what if the government decides, hey, we could give money to people if we just printed another $1,000 bills? So they print up another 1,000 $1 bills. Now there's 2,000 $1 bills, but there's only 1,000 things you can buy with them. You understand what just happened? Your money just got split in half. This is what you should be thinking about when you hear how the government is printing money. This is what they are doing. Now there are very complex reasons why that might not be a bad thing, but that is what is happening. When the government prints money, they are devaluing your money. Because they're not duplicate. If they increase the money supply by 100%, they're not increasing what can be purchased by 100%. They're only increasing the money supply, which means there's more money floating around, which means everybody knows this and they charge more for their services and everything goes up in price. So economics is very, very complicated, but that's a simplified version of what's going on. And that causes inflation. That's one of the things that will drive inflation. There are many things that drive inflation, okay? So you have to realize that putting your money in a savings account is just like putting it in your mattress and having a mouse living in there who's eating it. It's the same thing. It's like they're eating the dollar bills, and when you get it out, you're not going to have the money you thought you had. So that's risky also. Anyone else have any ideas of how you could save money other than a mutual fund or a savings account? But that would basically be a savings account. And if it's like put it under your mattress, that's even worse than a savings account because it can be stolen and there is no warranty on it, right? There's no guarantee that, no one's guaranteeing it so it can be paid back. You would just lose it. That's the problem with keeping money in your house. Someone breaks in and steals your cash, that's it, it's gone. You don't get it back. What's that? Well, budgeting is a way in which you can make your money stretch. The question is, what can you do to take money you have in cash and save it for a later time?
Buy gold.
Okay, buy gold or precious metals. That's a good one. What were you going to say? Huh? Okay, well that's a mutual fund. That's essentially a mutual fund, but yes. That's where you're putting money in a mutual fund, and that's what I suggest you do. My point here I'm trying to make is that there are many ways you can save money, but none of them are very good. And so the mutual fund is about the best one I have seen, even though there's risk involved in it. But the others have great risk. So let's talk about gold. Gold is a commodity that goes up and down also. Because when you buy gold itself, now some people actually buy the physical gold, not shares in gold. So they actually have like a bar of gold. Now the problem with having a bar of gold is, what are you going to do with it? Because again, that is even worse than cash. Right? So cash, if you try to melt cash down, it doesn't work, right? You just destroyed it. But gold, you can melt it down, turn it into other gold, and you don't know that it's your gold anymore. They could sell it back to you and you would never know. So that's why people like to steal precious metals, because you can melt them down without losing their value. And if they have a serial number stamped on them, they melt them down, and now they don't. And then they just mix some other materials in with it so that it changes the composition so they can't be identified that way, and then they can just resell them as precious metals. And so that's a problem with gold, right? And another problem with gold is that in a crashed economy, it's not worth a whole lot. Because somebody has to be willing to buy gold. See, it's not something you can eat. It's not something you can wear or you can live in. And so if the entire economy is trashed, where every company in America is worth zero, who's buying gold? Nobody's buying gold. It just doesn't have any value at that point, hardly. Or not as much as you would hope. It's not saving your money like you thought it was. So the thing you're going to notice as you really look at it is that saving money is just as difficult. In fact, it's analogous. In fact, it's the same, in many ways, the same thing as storing energy. It's the same, really it is the same thing as storing energy. And that's hard to do. That's very hard to do. Storing energy is very difficult. So we have batteries, right? And we store energy in them so we can use them later. But it's hard. And we lose a lot of energy storing energy. And so the technology is always trying to come up with ways to store energy in ways in which you're not going to lose the energy out of when you reuse it. And it's the same way with money. Money is the same thing you're doing. You're storing the future. You're taking a piece of your now, of your present, and you're storing it to use later. Well, there's always going to be risk involved in that. And doing nothing is even more risky. It's like, I'll just spend it all. Well, that is an option. I mean, it's like, let's just spend it all right now. I mean, think about it this way. Let's imagine that instead of money, we're talking about ice cream. And you have a freezer full of ice cream. And the electricity goes out. Not just in your house, in your entire state. Well, what do you do with the ice cream? Eat all you can eat. What else are you going to do with it? I mean, it's like, what do you do with it now? That's how it is with money many times. So it's like many people have come to the conclusion, well, what you ought to do is just live the best life you can live today. The Bible summarizes this when it says, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And that is a philosophy of money that some people still have. Now, it's not a very good philosophy. Because even though it is true that no matter how much you try to be good with money and save money and be responsible, you're still going to die one day and lose it all. That's true, but it doesn't have to be so quick. Right? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you will die, or be responsible and maybe you'll die in 90 years. And that's a big difference. That's not a small difference. That's a big difference. So that's why it's important that that's one reason why it's important that you be responsible with money. Okay? Because it makes a difference in your future. All right? Any other questions? So what you really all need to do, and I want to strongly encourage you to do this, is look into mutual funds. It does not take that much money to get started. And if you don't get started, you're going to blink, and then you're going to be my age, and then you're going to be trying to play catch up. And you can't catch up. You just can't. So the way compound interest works is that it's the amount of time that it's in. The difference between you having $2 million when you retire or no dollars when you retire is all about when you start. If you think, no, I got to get enough money, I'm going to put a big sum of money in, no, that is not how it works. That's not how the math works. And you can go online, they have a bunch of these investment calculators that will show you that if you would just put $10 a week in that mutual fund for 50 years, you will retire a millionaire, a multimillionaire actually. It's all you have to do. It's not hard. But if you wait till you're 50, you can't do it. You can't catch up. You would have to put in thousands of dollars a month to be able to try to catch up. And you just won't have that money. But you have $10 a week now. You can get that now just by not buying sodas, by not going to Dairy Queen or wherever, Whataburger or whatever it is you like to do. You can just sacrifice one going out to eat a week and put together enough money to retire a millionaire. You can do that now. But if you don't do it now, you won't be able to do it later. So you really need to start, if you have any interest at all, in not being one of the thousands, hundreds of thousands of senior citizens who have zero money to their name and are dependent on their family and on the government. If you don't want that life for yourself, then you have to start now. You just have to. Now, if you don't think that's a big deal and you don't think you're going to care that when you're 70, you basically are just waiting for your Social Security check to get there so you can buy cat food, because there's a lot of senior citizens in this country who live off of cat food because it's cheaper to buy than like tuna. And you don't think you're going to care about that? That's okay with you? Well, then that's your choice. That's fine. I'm not trying to like demonize that choice. That's a perfectly fine choice to make. Just understand that is the choice you're making. People think they're going to hit the lottery with a job and they're going to make all this money and it's going to set them up for the future. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. It's not, you're not doing the math. So I strongly encourage you to do that, all right? All right, so today, let's talk a little bit about how money interacts in ministry and spirituality. Now, I kind of touched on this in the first episode of this, or the first day we got together and talked. We talked about, how having money is not being unspiritual. And being poor is not the same thing as being spiritual, okay? And that is a maxim, that is a truism that you should drill into your head, because a lot of Christianity, especially fundamentalist type Christianity, wants to tell you that being poor is analogous or synonymous with being spiritual. That isn't true. That's not true at all. It's not true in the Bible. It's not a true statement. It's a false statement. You need to be aware of that. But what part or how does money interact with ministry? So a lot of times we have the idea of the ministry like being a pastor of a church or being a missionary or something like that as those being poor people. They forsake money to pursue ministry. Well, that's not exactly true, or it doesn't have to be true necessarily. And it's not necessarily connected. So it is true to some extent. So how is it true? Okay, so here's how it is true and how it is noble. So you have someone like the Apostle Paul, who is very smart and very talented. And this is what we find from writings of his and about him. Very smart and very talented. Capable of generating a lot of income. This is obvious by what he says. That he is able to support 20 to 50 people by him working with his own hands, just as a laborer. So that's pretty good. I mean, if you consider if you had 50 kids, how hard would you have to work to feed them all? Right? And so he's feeding, let's say, 30 people, full-grown adults, with his work. Okay, so that's good. He's very smart and very talented and can generate a tremendous amount of money. But Paul made a choice in his life. And he made a choice of foregoing riches, wealth, to preach the gospel. Okay, this is a very good choice. It's a choice that everybody should contemplate. You shouldn't dismiss that choice out of hand. You may think, well, no one in my family's ever been a pastor or a missionary, and how could I be that? You shouldn't dismiss that. Nobody in Paul's life was either. So that doesn't mean anything. Every one of you that is a real Christian, that are truly saved, should not dismiss ministry lightly. That should be a career path or an opportunity that you should truly, seriously consider. Now, it's not for everybody, but it might be for you. So you should consider that. But here's the thing about Paul. Paul didn't just forego financial opportunity or job opportunity. To do so, he decided to never marry, never have kids. Now, this is critical for you to understand this. If you want a ministry like Paul's, now there's other ways to have a ministry. Don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that if you want to be a pastor, you have to be, celibate and have no children. I'm saying if you want a ministry like Paul's ministry, which many people try to elevate and say, see, Paul was poor, therefore ministers should be poor. No. Paul was single and poor. Okay, there's a difference here. You don't get to make that choice if you're married. And especially if you have kids. You don't get to make that choice. You don't get to say, I'm going to not work, and if it means I'm going to sleep in the street, literally, well, then that's fine. I'll do that. Paul could do that. He had no family, so it's just him. And you might want to make that choice. You might want to say, like the Christians who went down into the South American jungles to preach to cannibalistic tribes, they went down and they were like, we're going to sacrifice our lives for this. Okay. But you can't have a family and do that. That doesn't work. Because the Bible says that when you have a family, you have a moral responsibility that supersedes all other responsibility to provide for your family. Paul says that a Christian who does not provide for his family is worse than an infidel. It's worse than someone who blasphemes the faith. It is in itself a rejection of the faith of Christ. So you have to be very careful with this, and this is why you have to think about it. Every one of you should consider at some point in your life, before you get married, whether that life is the one you want or whether maybe God is calling you to something else. But you can't have everything in life. Now, there are other ways to have a ministry that doesn't require that level of commitment like that. That's fine. But then Paul says he writes in 1 Corinthians on this issue, and Paul teaches, look, you can get married. There's nothing wrong with it. He says there is no sin in getting married. It is not more virtuous to remain single and serve God. You can get married, but the person who gets married, the man, the woman who gets married, they no longer serve God first. They serve their spouse first. Now, if you think about that, what I just said, that you serve your spouse first, and you compare that to what you have probably heard a lot of your life, that no matter who you're married to or how many kids you have, God first and family second, that may sound jarring to you. But that's what the Bible says. And you can read it. It's in 1 Corinthians. Paul goes through and it lays that out and says, you can't say, I serve God first if you're married. You have to please your wife or please your husband. Because you have to serve them. You have to be concerned about them. And you can't say, no, God's first. And if that means that my wife or my husband or my kids have to go hungry because we're serving God, that's spiritual decision. No, it's not. That is a bad decision. So you have to understand that when you choose marriage and family, you are making a choice that is going to limit you in ministry. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be a pastor or a missionary or a Sunday school teacher or a preacher or a teacher or whatever it is. You can do all those things, but you won't be able to do them with the same abandon, with the same commitment as if you hadn't gotten married. You understand that? So that's a choice you have to make. And that is not to try to demonize that choice. It is a perfectly honorable choice to say, I am going to have a family, and I'm going to serve my family and provide for them, and then I'm going to serve God and serve the church and have a ministry. That is an honorable choice. There's nothing wrong with that choice. That's the choice I made. That is a choice that probably 99% of Christians make. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, Paul said that of all the apostles, only 2 of them chose to not marry. All the rest were married. So Peter was married, John was married, James was married. All the apostles except for Paul and Barnabas, they were all married. So they all made that same choice too. So this is not a bad choice to say, I want to get married, and I'm going to put my family first, and then I'm going to put the ministry second. That is not a bad choice. You just have to understand that it is a choice. So if you have this deep desire or yearning to serve God exclusively, well, that choice requires you to sacrifice something else. Okay? But you don't get to do that and have your cake. Right? You don't get to eat the cake and have the cake. It's one or the other. So you have to think about that. So then how does money, let's say that most likely, just statistically, everybody in this room is not going to choose Paul's path. Statistically speaking, I'm not trying to discourage anyone, but statistically speaking, everybody in this room will decide, I want to get married, I want to have a family. Great. Okay, that's fine. So let's assume that that's the case and every one of you is going to make that choice. What place does money have in the ministry? Well, it has a huge place. So people will tell you that you don't need money to have a ministry. Well, that's not true. It wasn't even true for Paul, who needed less money than most. It still wasn't true for Paul. And you can read his letters where he talks about it, and he's very clear that that is not true. It does require money. You have to eat, and nobody's giving it to you for free. And God would not have any of us begging. The idea, the Roman Catholic idea of the monasteries where the monks go out in the mornings through the village and they beg for food one is because they have no money to buy it, but also because they think it makes them humble to be beggars. This is not a biblical idea. This is not a biblical idea. Preachers begging the congregations for money, missionaries begging churches for money, none of this is biblical. This is not how it's supposed to be. Paul is very clear. When a missionary goes out as a missionary, he should be able to provide for himself. This is not to say that nobody should support him. Paul commends churches that sent money to his ministry. He says, you did good. You participated. I appreciate it. But he also said, I don't need anything from anybody either. I can provide for me and for the people that travel with me by myself. And so when we're talking about money in the ministry, we need to understand what this is. And money is required. And if you're going to have a ministry, you should be able to sustain your own ministry. Whether it be a missionary or a pastor or whatever it is ministry you want to have, you should. How are you going to do that then? First off, all of you should seriously desire a ministry, no matter what it is, your goal should not be to go to a Christian church your whole life and never do anything there. Because if you do that, you are ignoring your spiritual existence. You're ignoring the fact that you are a spiritual being. You're not doing anything with that. So you have to think about, what is my ministry going to be? Now, it may not be an official titled ministry. You may not be the elder of the church or the missionary in this city. You might just be somebody who takes a turn teaching Sunday school to the kids. Or maybe you're somebody who just brings a message once a month to the open meeting, and that's your ministry. And once a month you get up and you teach or preach a sermon in the open meeting. Or many other things. Or you lead music, or you participate in the music, or whatever it is you have talent in, you use that for spiritual endeavor and for spiritual purpose. You all need to be doing that. You can't just live a worldly life as a Christian. It's just not acceptable. You have to think about it. What is your ministry going to be? And then you need to put some real effort into that. Don't just, get up on Sunday morning and go, it's my turn to teach Sunday school. Let me find a quick story to tell the kids. It can't be like that. That's not a ministry. That's just playing a game. You're just going through the motions. You're just playing charades. You have to realize that spirituality is a real thing. And the church is the place in which we live properly, is godliness. If you can be godly with how you spend your money and learn how to be content with the things that you have and learn how to save and how to invest, then you will very quickly in your life get to a point where you don't have to worry about those things. Which means you can refocus that energy that you were spending on worrying, you can focus that on doing something spiritual. Look, I've been on both sides of this issue. I've been in the point where I'm $60,000 in debt and worried every day about how I'm going to pay the bills. And I've been in the position where I have zero debt and I have money in the bank to provide for whatever might come up, or I say whatever, within reason, for contingencies and emergencies. Like if the car breaks down, I can go and buy a new car with cash. I have money to do that, right? I've been in both places. And it's a lot easier for me to focus on spiritual things when I'm not drowning in the cares of this world. So that is what you need to focus on when you're young. You need to realize that you could get yourself financially established by the time you're 30, easily. I'm not saying you're going to be like a multimillionaire, but you will be comfortably established. Not just because you'll have generated enough income to do so, because that's not enough. Many people think, well, if I could make enough money, I would never have to worry about money. Have you ever read the stories of these people that make millions of dollars and how they're almost all bankrupt? There's a truth that you need to understand about the world. And this is how it goes. There's always more people willing to take your money than to give you money. Always. So no matter how much money you make, there's always at least one more person willing to take it. So let's say you make $1 million a day. Do you think there aren't stores out there willing to take 1,000,001? Of course they are. And what you'll find as your income goes up, if you don't learn to be godly with your money, as your income goes up, your spending goes up. Have you noticed that? When you make a little bit of money, you're very careful as you spend your money. And as you make more, you think, well, I can just spend more. And you spend more. And you spend more. You make more, you spend more. You make more, you spend more. And you always end up at the same place with nothing. So what does it matter if you make $100 a day or $1 million a day if at the end of the day you end up with $0? Well, then you wasted just more money. So it's not just about making more money. When I say that by 30, you could be well established. I don't mean that you'll be making more money. I mean that you can take these things we're talking about, these godly decisions, these godly propositions, and you can integrate them into your life so that you are living your life in a better way. You're spending your money smarter. You're saving smarter. You're investing smarter. And then by the time you've done that for a while, when you get to be 30, that'll be the way you live your life. And then you will have a lot of freedom to do things for spiritual endeavor that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And I'm saying 30, you can probably get there a lot quicker. But let's just say 30, and that's not a bad age. I mean, that's the age in which Christ took up his ministry. That's the age in which John the Baptist took up his ministry. That's roughly the age in which Paul took up his ministry. I mean, this is not an unheard of. Now, Moses was 80 when he took up his. Took him 80 years to get these things beat into his head. Don't be that way. Don't wait till you're 80 to do this. Don't make it take that long. You need to come to your senses much earlier than that, much younger than that, which is why we're doing this. So what do you do with your money as it comes to ministry? How do you properly manage your money associated with ministry? Well, one thing is you need to learn to give. Now, that's not always obvious to everybody or easy for everybody. Maybe you haven't even grown up in that. It's what some churches call tithing. I don't believe in tithing in the sense of you have to give 10%. I do believe in the idea that everybody should give. Now, I don't think it's just to the church that you should give. I actually think that Christians ought to be generous with their money in many ways. James says that one of the hallmarks of true faith is that when we see somebody in need, we provide for that need in so much as we're able to do so. So he says if you see somebody and they're cold, don't tell them, hey, I hope you get warm. He says you give them a jacket. If you see somebody who's hungry, you give them food to eat. And so much as you're able to do this, that should be part of your giving. Okay, so that's part of it. And the other part is you should be looking to give money towards spiritual pursuit. I don't give most of my money to feeding the poor or clothing the naked or housing the homeless. That's just not where I give most of my money. And the reason why I don't is because we live in a society that is full of charities that do this. They just don't need much from me. But they are not doing hardly anything for spreading the gospel. Now, I don't think that, I know that eating and having somewhere to live are very important. I'm not saying they're not. They are very important. But not going to hell when you die is very important also. And nobody's doing anything about that. The only people that are going to do anything about that are Christians. Because they don't think that that's true. They don't believe that hell exists. They don't believe that sin has consequences or that sin even exists. Now, whether that's right or wrong is a whole different discussion. But I do believe in those things. I believe that sin does exist. I believe that hell does exist. I believe that the kingdom of God exists. And I believe that everybody is not just a pile of tissue and blood. I believe that we actually have a spirit that needs to be saved. Now, if I actually truly believe that, then I should be putting my money into that endeavor. And so should you. You should be investing in that also. Now, that does not mean that you should take all the money you make and send it to missionaries. That is not what you should do. Or that you should take your entire check and put it into the church building fund or something of that nature. That is not what you should do. What you should do is you should very deliberately and very carefully, and maybe get some advice from somebody who can kind of give you some guidance on how to think, but you should very carefully and very deliberately consider what percentage of your income should you be giving to spiritual endeavor so that you are a part of that. It's the same way as what we started with the idea of mutual funds. You shouldn't take all your money every week and put it into the mutual funds. That's not what you should do. That's not a good idea. It may seem like you're going to get there faster, but you really won't. It's not a good idea. You have to have money to spend. You have to have money to enjoy. You have to have money to pursue other things in life. You can't just invest. So you have to then deliberately consider what balance should you do between investing in your retirement and living your life now. What is the proper balance between those two pursuits? Same way with the ministry. Same way with spiritual endeavor. What is the proper balance, not for me, what is the proper balance for you between living your worldly life, which is good and you should do it. One of the big problems with Christianity is that they have historically minimized the life you have now. And so for them, the only thing that matters is heaven. Heaven's there, live for heaven, don't worry about your life now. That is a very bad doctrine. It's not a biblical doctrine. It's not a logical doctrine. You have to balance that between living a profitable, successful life now, meaning in this world, and being a part of the world to come. You can't just do one or the other. The agnostics, the atheists, the naturalists, the humanists, they're living everything for now and nothing for later. And the hyper-spiritual Christians are doing the same mistake, only mirror image. They're living everything for later, and they just throw away their life today like it doesn't matter. Your life here on earth matters. What job you do, what career you have, what accomplishments you pursue, all of these things matter. You matter now and here. But your spiritual life, your citizenship in the kingdom of God also matters. And so you have to balance them. Now, I personally, and this is not what I'm telling you to do, I'm just giving you some insight into how I look at it, and you can then use that to maybe come up with your own idea. But my insight is that I kind of agree with the Old Testament view, that God would take roughly 10%. God would take roughly 10%. That was what you gave to spiritual pursuit, and you kept 90% for your life now. Now, you can say, well, it should be the other way around. And you know, there are certain pastors, like for instance, one named Rick Warren, you might know him. He's a pastor of a large church in California who when he started becoming very wealthy from selling a book, he has one of the most sold books in the world, in history. When he started really making money from that, he started doing what he calls reverse tithing, and he gives 90% of his income now and keeps 10%. But he's also coming from where he's making millions and millions of dollars. But that still, it doesn't matter how much you're making. Giving 90% away of anything is very noble and very incredible. Now, if you don't have millions of dollars, you can't do that. And you shouldn't do that. Right? And I certainly don't, and I don't do that. Now, when I was young, let me give you a little example of what kind of maybe illustrate what I'm trying to keep you from the danger of. When I was young, I was very fanatical or very zealous. I guess I still am, but I was very overly fanatical and zealous. And so when I had just gotten married and I was a missionary in Mexico, and we didn't get that much money in offerings, and I didn't understand what I understood now about I should be working and making money for myself and not depending only on offerings. I didn't understand that. So we were living on offerings and very little. We gave about 45% of our income away. Now that was not smart. That was very foolish, because that put us in a financial bind all the time because we're trying to be very spiritual. Shouldn't do that. You need to think about things the same way you would as investing in a mutual fund. If you are starving to death to be able to invest in a mutual fund, you're putting too much money into it. You need to be able to pivot in your life now and take opportunities and start a business and have the money to buy a car and fix the roof and fix the air conditioning. You need to have money to do those things. You can't put all the money away for the future and then ruin your life today. That doesn't make sense. It's the same way with spiritual endeavor. You need to be putting time and money, because those are the two things you can save. So two things you can invest, time and money. You need to be putting time and money into your spiritual future at a rate that allows you to be successful now. And that's the critical point. What do you need to do to be successful in this life? I do not believe, and I think I can prove this biblically, but I do not believe that people who ruin their life on earth to create a life in heaven are going to be highly rewarded. I do not think that that is at all what God intended. And I think I can prove that very clearly in the Scriptures. If you don't agree with me, we can look at that later. We're running out of time, so I don't want to get into it. But if you're willing to accept that proposition at face value, then that's how you should live your life. That you need to be successful in your job, you need to be successful in your career, you need to be successful in your bank account, you need to be successful in your family, in your marriage, with your children, and you need to be successful in the kingdom of God. And you cannot sacrifice either one for the other. It's not real success. So think about it, and we'll end with this. Just think about this illustration. I'm not going to give you a specific one because I think most of you could probably think of somebody who would resemble what I'm about to describe, and that would probably be a more compelling illustration. But think about a person who is incredibly successful, let's say, at basketball or at football or as a doctor, but he has about 5 divorces to his name, and none of his kids speak to him, and he has no money in the bank because he spent it all. That person is hardly ever regarded as being a successful person, because they were a failure in everything except one thing. But now think of a person who may never be a great athlete or a great scientist or a great businessman, but he lived his whole life with his same wife. All his kids love him. All his kids went to school. All his kids are successful in their lives. He has money in the bank. He retires with dignity. He lives out his life. He never has to beg from anybody. That is generally considered to be a successful person. Even though his name may not be in Wikipedia, that's success. That is a success I want for each of you. You can't have that success if you ignore the spiritual. And you can't have that success if you focus on the spiritual and are losers in your life. You have to have the balanced approach. All right? Any questions on that? All right.